What's up, investors? Here's the Russian Jet. It seems we have finally arrived at a moment that no one truly believed would come. Not after all the threats, insults and shattered alliances we witnessed over the past 3 years. Not after a disaster of a meeting in the Oval Office that took place 2 weeks ago. And definitely not as quickly as it actually happened. Yet, here we are. Watching as the United States and Ukraine unveil what some already call a miracle. A formal agreement on a short-term ceasefire, 30 days to be specific.
Ceasefire, Ukraine has agreed to it, and hopefully Russia will agree to it.
Designed to freeze the fighting and give both sides a moment to breathe. What is even more surprising is that this deal materialized just weeks after once again this spectacular Oval Office fiasco, followed by a pause in the US military assistance and the sharing of the intelligence. Now the Americans have agreed to resume sending weapons, intelligence and who knows what else, but not out of unconditional love or trust in Ukraine. Instead, they requested that Kyiv immediately halts its attacks and stands still for 30 days. A window so brief it feels like a single heartbeat in the context of a war that has dragged on for years. But as soon as Ukraine's president and his negotiators put their signatures on that paper, the story changed focus. Suddenly, the entire world wants to know one thing. Will Vladimir Putin sign on this as well? After all, he screamed for the last several months that it was Ukraine that did not want peace, and now it's finally time for Putin to show if his words truly mean anything. Yeah, you know. The paper is signed, Vladimir Vladimirovich. What you say now? This question matters because for all the talk about the war's ends and the possibility of peace, nothing will change unless Russia also lays down its guns. Trump and his team insist that they have done their part by making Ukraine resort to a limited ceasefire. Now there's Putin, who must decide if he wants to join what the Americans describe as a historic opportunity to pause the bloodshed. And if Putin refuses, it appears that the heat will come down on him alone. We simply cannot see Trump blaming Zelensky anymore, saying that he does not want peace. Zelensky now has the cards.
You don't have the cards.
The new administration may have spent weeks criticizing Ukraine for being stubborn or ungrateful, but now that those accusations have been settled, the burden has shifted, finally. Most likely soon. People wonder if now Putin has the guts to sign a piece of paper crafted in Jeddah that effectively forces him to stand down. Perhaps in exchange the sanctions might melt away or new business deals could be forged, or Trump might even talk up the Russian leader as a man of reason. Or maybe Putin will just walk away, leaving Trump fuming about broken promises and lost opportunities. Nobody knows. But the world has surely frozen in anticipation to see the end of this endless saga. So today, guys, let's explore this sudden turn of events in more details. By the way, once again, since the news are coming to us at a supersonic speed, by the time you are watching this video, some things might have changed. Please go ahead and check my channel for new updates if any, and feel free to subscribe if you want to stay in the loop. On this channel we do such updates as soon as something happens, trying to bring you the freshest news possible. Thank you so much, now let's continue. At the start of these negotiations, you would have been forgiven for expecting a complete fiasco. After all, the US, as a result of failed talks, had just paused its military aid, cut off its intelligence sharing, and publicly demanded that Ukraine apologize for supposedly provoking a war. Americans were calling for territorial concessions, massive sums of money, and the resignation of Ukraine's leader. And meanwhile, Trump's camp had all but declared that Kyiv was to blame for everything, while Putin conveniently owed no one anything. In fact, some of Trump's top allies openly floated the idea of letting Russia have its way if that would guarantee a swift end to the war. No one genuinely believed that these positions could be reconciled in a matter of weeks, let alone that some brand new ceasefire plan would emerge from the wreckage. Then came the Jeddah talks, which hardly looked promising at first. Both delegations stepped into seemingly cursed settings, weighed down by mistrust and frustration with one another. Many people expected them to walk away with a half-baked statement that would be dead on arrival. Yet, in a bizarre turn, the Americans managed to secure what they wanted the most: a formal pledge from Ukraine to freeze the front lines for 30 days if Russia would do the same.
We made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire.
The reward? The immediate restoration of the US military aid, a move that signified more than just another shipment of HIMARS or drones. It hinted a complete shift in Washington's stance from pushing Ukraine to face the music alone to rallying behind them once again, providing they stick to this new script. This is also one of the best examples of Trump's impulsivity and how the man can change his mind from one day to another, simply because of a phone call or because he just felt like it.
Did I say that? I can't believe I said that. Next question.
Something we talked about in our previous episode, by the way. One day he will do everything possible to help Ukraine win, then he turns his back on the country, and the very next day he resumes all the support. This was relatively expected to happen simply because shutting down all the aid completely and irreversibly is not like closing down a leaking water tap. Nobody can obviously promise he will not change his mind tomorrow, but in our personal opinion, the media and some political experts overreacted a little bit when they said that it's over for Ukraine, the war is lost, and Trump is dividing the country already for the resources along with Putin. Resorting to such apocalyptic the end of days scenario is not what journalism should be about. This idea of a month-long ceasefire feels almost whimsical, given the war's brutal history. No one denies that for thousands of soldiers and civilians, even a short pause could be life-saving, a chance to catch one's breath or reunite with the family. It might even lower the degree of a hatred to that point, that both sides would not want to resume fighting, not after they finally tasted long-awaited peace, even if it is just for 30 days. But the real question is, what happens after those 30 days expire? Does the clock reset for another 30 days, indefinitely postponing the carnage? Or does this freeze become a bait and switch, a tactic to shuffle troops or gather more supplies before the storm resumes? That is a very good question, especially to the regime of Putin. Unfortunately, even if we are able to ask this question and even receive an answer, the level of trust to the responder will be very minimal. Skeptics note that Putin has used ceasefires before not as a path to peace, but as a method to regroup and strike again. And meanwhile, some observers suggest that Trump genuinely wants to rack up an impressive win, to prove that only he can strong-arm opposing sides into momentary truce. Perhaps that political triumph matters more to him than the lasting stability of the region. Perhaps the real reason why he wants to end the war so much is to prove everyone that he is a man of his word, that he keeps his promises. And maybe he could not care less about the fortunes of both Russians and Ukrainians. But in one way or another, well, a peace is a peace. Ukraine, for its part, must weigh the cost and assume the risks of signing an unconditional truce. Now that they have agreed to freeze with no immediate reward beyond renewed US support, they risk looking weak to both domestic and foreign audiences. On the other hand, Ukraine can point to one indisputable fact. They got their ally back, at least for now. They might be worth the temporary loss of momentum on the battlefield. If it all implodes, however, they can say they tried. If it works, they might claim the moral high ground and new leverage over Russia. We will see if the Ukrainians can turn these 30 days into something more than just an intermission in a horrific play. And even if Russia declines to have peace, the Ukraine is still a winner in our opinion. This will show the world that it is no longer Ukraine that does not want to stop fighting. All eyes are now on Putin, the one man left who can throw a wrench into the entire arrangement. After weeks of hearing how the Americans had turned their backs on Ukraine, we see that the real pivot has arrived. Ukraine has done what the US demanded. They have offered a ceasefire, no strings attached. Trump's people can proudly wave that document, proclaiming that they forced the Ukrainians to hold fire. But this maneuver places Putin in a very awkward position. If he rejects the deal, he risks antagonizing Trump, who has staked his reputation on bringing peace. And if there is one thing Putin likely cherishes as much as strategic advantage, it is the idea of having a friendly face in Washington. Absenting Trump now might cost Russia future sanctions relief or lucrative partnerships that the Russian leadership has long hoped for. On the other hand, if Putin signs, many of his war hawks and loyal propagandists will wonder why the quote-unquote great liberator suddenly caved to foreign pressure. There is also the question of how to justify that move to the Russian public, which has been fed years of state-driven narratives about foreign puppeteers and an existential struggle against Western forces. They might not take kindly to the image of Putin bowing to the very forces he claimed orchestrating the entire conflict. So, if you are looking for the moment of truth, this might be it. Despite all the spin and spectacle, the final call belongs to the Kremlin. Putin can stand by his vow to keep pressing forward until every inch of contested territory is liberated, or he can endure the massive blowback of signing a truce that was proposed in Saudi Arabia with minimal Russian input. Whichever path he chooses, there is no more hiding behind the excuse that Ukraine refuses to negotiate or that the US is too rigid. Now it's up to Putin to prove the world that he is a man of his word. Zelensky didn't want peace, you say? Well, he does now. What about you, Vladimir Vladimirovich? Are you ready? For a long time, many Western and Russian analysts believed that the conflict was near impossible to end, given the deeply entrenched interests on all sides. Putin found a way to keep the war going without spurring wide-scale domestic dissent. The US wavered between heavy involvement and frustration, and Ukraine struggled to maintain international support for its cause. But this ceasefire arrangement, brief as it may be, represents a tangible shift. By orchestrating an agreement in Jeddah, of all places, Trump has forced the world to consider that maybe the war is not destined to last forever in a form of slowly simmering decades-long conflict. Some see it as a cynical ploy intended to solely to bolster Trump's poll numbers, or to carve out new business opportunities. Others think it is a necessary first step, no matter how fragile, to keep the conflict from descending into even more unbridled violence. Still, it would be foolish to ignore the fault lines that could sink this effort at any second. If Russia violates the ceasefire, or if some rogue faction decides to keep fighting, will the deal collapse immediately, or will they try to salvage it? If the 30 days pass and neither side is ready to extend, does that mean that old lines are redrawn and the war accelerates back to full speed? Perhaps the biggest wildcard of it all is how any of all these leaders, Trump, Putin, or the Ukrainian government, can spin a partial freeze into a narrative that satisfies their own core supporters. We might witness a wave of propaganda from Moscow trying to rebrand this foreign-made ceasefire as a glorious Russian initiative, or we might see some fresh meltdown in Washington if Trump feels Putin embarrassed him on the world stage. Everything depends on how the players move in this fragile dance, and we should probably keep our eyes wide open as it unfolds. Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to my channel. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.